Planning, Zoning, and Agriculture Committee to order. Roll call, please. If I turn on my microphone, I just did.
Turn mine on, please.
Yes.
No, turn two. Okay, there. Mr. Oltog.
Present.
Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Tripp. Mr. Washington. Mr. Tholen. Ms. Polk. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Hildebrand. Mr. Einfeld. Mr. Payton. Ms. Peters. Mr. Ritter.
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler. Mr. Lear. We have a quorum.
Thank you. There weren't any public comment sheets up there. Is there anyone here who would like to make public comment? Okay, seeing none. Going on to approval of minutes of the February 21st meeting that you received. Are there any additions or corrections? Motion to approve would be in order by Mr. Stauffenberg, seconded by Mr. Washington. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Going to the building report.
In that ridiculously large packet you have, you should find the monthly building division report for February 2018, just like this. For February, we issued 16 permits valued at $4,932,486 and collected fees of $10,978. The majority of that valuation was a new roof for the Sears warehouse complex in Manteno Township, valued at $4,767,800. Those fees seem to be a little low, but if you compare them to last year's fees, we only brought in $11,418 last year for February, so we are on target for the fee collection. Total collected was $11,953, including fines, re-inspection fees, and other administrative fees.
Any questions? Motion to approve be in order by Mr. Payton, seconded by Ms. Peters. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. I'd like to make a request.
We can do the stormwater first.
Oh, we can do?
Yeah,
Okay.
stormwater's fine.
All right, we'll do the stormwater.
Our MS4 program requires me to ask at every planning and zoning meeting if anyone has any stormwater issues that they would like to discuss. Okay. Then
All right.
we can move on.
I'd like to make a request to amend the agenda. That we would take number 7, transportation, next, and then go on and take the first zoning case, and then skipping the second zoning case and going on to the third zoning case through the rest, and then coming back to the second zoning case, number 6. And it's a good recommendation, trust me. Mr. Wheeler? All right. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Ritter. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, going on to transportation, number 7, rural transit update.
Okay. Our rural transit agreements. Every year we have to continue our rural transit service, we have to submit an application. And letters were sent out to transportation providers in the area. Showbus was the only responder. And they've been providing service to us since 1999. Got a little bit of a reminder of service types here. It's all Monday through Friday. We have a demand response system, which is a traditional rural transit service. We charge $4 a fare. Riders from rural area come into the urban area. They call Showbus by noon the day before the trip to schedule their trip, and they can take many trips during the day. They can go from one location to another. Our ridership for 2017 on the demand response system was 14,905 people. We have a deviated fixed route system to Moments, which is called the Moments commuter route. That's $2 a round trip fare, $1 each way. First bus leaves at 4 a.m. and every hour through 5 p.m. That provides many work trips to employers in Momence. Our ridership on that service was 15,304 for 2017. Total ridership is 30,209 for last year, and that's 30% more than the previous year. Federal funding portion to provide this service is $166,968. And we have just received additional funding for intercity bus service, estimated at $14,684. That's a separate agreement that we'll get to in a minute. And state funding for this program is $1,056,935. We only spent about half that last year. Local match necessary is $15,000 from the county, and it's included in the planning department's budget. We are asking for approval to submit the Section 5311 and DOAP applications. And that application is this big. I don't know if it's in your packet or not, but it's really great reading. So that is what we are asking for on rural transit.
You need a motion?
Yes, and that's probably a roll call since it's
okay. Motion to approve by Ms. Peters, seconded by Mr. Mulcahy. Roll call, please. Question, Mr. Kinzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What the Illinois Downstate Operating Assistance Program is a request for what? And if it fails, then what?
Illinois Downstate Operating
I think
Assistance.
that's that packet you got.
Well, that's
well,
million.
if it fails, and we do not have, unless the county would like to fund it, we don't have a rural transit service.
Then the transit drops. Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Mr. Wheeler?
Question, and you may know this or not, because I don't think Jeff's here, but is this a federal pass-through through the state?
Yes, it is.
All of this rural transit is federal pass-through through the state.
I can't say that all of it is.
I thought, or excuse me, a vast majority. I thought most
Laura
of it
from
was.
Showbus is here, could probably speak better to that than I can, if you'd like.
The source of the funds originally, it's federal pass through the state for the most part, and then is there a state match as well, or I just want to make sure I got that.
Yeah, the section 5311 is a federal pass-through through IDOT. The Downstate Operating Assistance Program comes through a special funding stream from sales tax, and that is state money.
That's state.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that. Do you happen to have the amounts that are broken between the two?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
I think I just read those
Right.
off.
I apologize, but I just.
State funding was $1,056,935, and federal funding is $166,698.
698. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fairfield?
What was the cost to the county?
$15,000.
Okay, any others? We have a motion and a second? Right? All in favor, say aye. Oh, roll call.
Mr. Olthoff.
Aye.
Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Washington. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Hildebrand. Mr. Payton. Ms. Peters. Mr. Ritter.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler. Motion carried.
Anything else under transit?
Yes, we have the purchase of service agreement with Showbus, and this is an agreement that we make every year with Showbus to provide the service we just talked about.
You need a motion on that?
Yes.
All right.
Motion for the chairman to sign.
Motion for the chairman to sign the service agreement with Showbus. Mr. Stauffenberg, Mr. Washington. Any questions? All in favor, say, is this, no, we don't, no money.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
would
there
be, yes,
Roll
that
call vote,
15,000.
please.
Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Washington. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Hildebrand. Mr. Payton. Ms. Peters. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
Okay, transit asset management plan.
Yes. We are now, due to federal requirements, required to maintain a transit asset management plan, which we must submit by October 1st, 2018. There are Tier 1 and Tier 2 transit operators, and Kankakee County is considered a Tier 2 because we receive FTA funds from the state. IDOT is sponsoring a statewide group plan that they will be preparing, which would include us, and that'll be prepared by the Rural Transit Assistance Center, which is part of the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs. There would be no cost for opting into this group plan and would meet the requirements of the federal requirements. We are requesting authorization for the chairman to sign the opt-in form.
Is there a motion? By Mr. Washington, seconded by Mr. Kinzinger. Any discussion? This is not a...
There's no money being spent, no.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right, going on to, under zoning, ZBA case 1712, request for rezoning from R2 high-density residential district to I2 general industrial district on parcel generally situated in section 26 of Manteno Township. Petitioner is Homestar Bank and Financial Services, property owner and applicant.
ZBA case 17-12. This is a square block in the Diversitech campus that's owned by Homestar Bank and Financial Services. That in 2014, let me back up a second. All of Diversitech campus back in the 1980s was zoned I2 industrial with a planned unit development attached to it. In 2014, this property in question was rezoned to R2 high-density residential for a housing development that never materialized. So the owner is now requesting that the property be returned back to the I2 general industrial district that originally was for industrial use, and they do have a potential buyer ready to build on that property. It's at 420 Chestnut Street in Diversitech. This was heard on March 5th by the Zoning Board of Appeals, and they voted 7-0 to recommend approval, and there were no objectors present.
Is there a motion? By Mr. Wheeler, seconded by Mr. Mulcahy. Discussion. Mr. Kinzinger.
I noticed that it's within a mile and a half of Manteno, and this is just a question of information. What the county does here still leaves the village of Manteno open, or who drives whom on that situation? Does Manteno take the lead, or does the county take the lead when it's within a mile and a half of the village limits?
I guess it depends on what you mean by driving. We have zoning authority and jurisdiction over this property.
So that if it doesn't meet the Manteno Village code requirements, our codes are in control.
Apply. Yes, our codes.
Do we have a requirement that the Manteno Village has to approve ahead of us if it's within that mile and a half?
No, they are notified, and they made no comments, either positive or negative, about this change.
Okay, very good. So they have been notified?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Every municipality within a mile and a half of a zoning case
That's
must
what
be
that
notified.
means when it says within a mile and a half, they're notified. Thank you.
They are notified in that instance.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Stauffenberg is going to abstain from this vote.
I'll vote present.
Okay.
Along with the majority.
Okay, all right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Going on to number ZBA.
1803.
Yeah. ZBA case 1803, request for a special use permit 121-99C34 solar farm in the A1 agricultural district on parcel generally situated in section 20 of St. Anne Township. Petitioners are Jeffrey Giel, John Giel, subject to life estate of Patricia Giel, property owners, and Newman Solar LLC applicant.
Because of the complexity of these cases and all the moving parts for the next 9 cases, I have asked that the developer and his team of witnesses give you a presentation that explains how solar farms work. and the particulars of the cases. Once they're done with that presentation, we'll go into the particulars for each actual site here. I will caution you to only discuss what was discussed at the public hearing. Okay?
Joe, where are they going to speak from?
From this one up here.
Good morning. Thank you. Delbert, thank you very much. Always a pleasure. Mark Gershon, I'm sorry, representing Cypress Creek Renewables. Always a pleasure to be back before the Kankakee County Board and its committees, in part because what it means, as with this case, is that after months, if not years, of working with your staff, with the community, bringing this all together, we finally get to bring a full plan to you. We hope you'll be as excited about it as we are. I do want to start, however, because I'm probably in great part responsible for, what did Delbert call it, that ridiculously large packet of documents you have in front of you. So our apologies in advance, but please know that it's always our goal to make sure you have every piece of documentation your code requires, all the background information, et cetera, response to every one of your standards and requirements to the codes. And we're pleased that as a result of putting that packet before you, which of course the zoning board also had, that we received a unanimous recommendation of approval from the zoning board on all nine of the projects you're going to see before you today. As Delbert has warned me many times over the last few years, we will make sure to stick with essentially the same presentation we provided to the zoning board, so it's on the same set of information there. And we're going to walk through that full presentation, and then we'll start going through each of the properties individually and turn it over to Delbert for each one and for your consideration on essentially the same order as what's in your packet. I want to also say we brought with us today, because I want them to be here if you have questions or not, our full consulting team with me, in addition to Scott Novak, who is here, and Kankakee with CYPRESS. We have Dan Variotti, who's our civil engineer with TRC Solutions. Drew Lyons is with Cohn Resnick, an appraisal firm, one of the most noted firms in the state and in the country for review of projects like this. And my colleague, Ann Smith, who is also here as well. But again, we're here, our job, our desire to answer your questions, to make sure that you have a comfort level with us, and to make sure that we're all moving forward together. Let me turn this over to Scott.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to share some information about solar PV, something that we're really passionate about. Delbert had asked that I kind of go into the same level of detail that we had done at the ZBA hearings earlier over the last few weeks, and I think that's a good suggestion, because I think it'll give a good context as far as what we're proposing and really what solar developers all across the state will be proposing as far as solar energy activity over the next few years here in Illinois. So I want to start by talking a little bit about us as a company, and I'll start by identifying myself. My name is Scott Novak. I am the senior developer for Cypress Creek Renewables. I am based here in Illinois. I am the kind of on-the-ground leader of our zoning and outreach group here. So I am, among other things, tasked with presenting to folks like you, reaching out to communities, neighbors, and making sure I can provide information and be helpful whenever possible. Cypress Creek Renewables, we're a national developer, builder, and owner-operator of solar farms. We were founded in 2014, but we were founded by a few individuals who have over 20 years of experience individually developing solar farms in their individual markets. And what they did was they came together with kind of a goal to replicate that across the country. They came up with a formula to get as much solar energy into the ground, because they believe, and we all do now, believe strongly in that mission. We believe strongly in renewables. We have about 150 operational solar power plants across the country right now. We have a development pipeline that's about 5 times that large. In terms of power numbers, that pipeline represents 5 to 6 gigawatts. We've actually developed 2.2 gigawatts to date, which is a great milestone, which we just hit at the end of last year. As far as where we've developed solar power plants, this map up here represents areas in which both we have completed operational assets or actual power plants that we are running and managing today. Those are represented in yellow. So you can see kind of all the way from the northwest down to the southeast and most places in between, we have a presence. The blue shaded states represent states where we have development activity. You'll notice Illinois is shaded blue, but we also have activity going on in a number of other states as well. Stepping back, the solar industry is growing at really a tremendous rate, and there's a few reasons for that. First and foremost, I mean, costs have plummeted essentially. Since 2010, they've come down 70%. And I'm not talking about just the modules themselves. I'm talking about really all the components that make up a solar farm have just experienced really a reckoning in terms of how far the costs have come. And what's happened is states have noticed this. And it's, you know, it used to be the case where, you know, the states that had 300 days of sunshine, California and Nevada and kind of desert areas where you think about sun, where that's where the projects made sense financially. But what's happened is because the costs have fallen so much, that's not the case anymore. Northern states, and some have hopped on quicker than Illinois, make perfect sense for solar activity as well. A few other little big picture points I wanted to highlight. Solar is not only a growing industry amongst just in general, but it's also a very much a growing industry among its power generation peers. In 2017, 30% of all new electric generating capacity was brought online in 2017. So that's second only to natural gas as far as other power generating methods. 53 gigawatts of solar capacity was installed in the US. That's enough to power over 10 million homes. That's where we're at now. And that number is expected to grow tremendously as we move ahead. Here in Illinois, the Future Energy Jobs Act, which was passed at the end of 2016, has really paved the way for solar development in the state. Essentially what it did was it solidified an RPS, which is Renewable Portfolio Standard. That basically says the percentage of the power that needs to be sold in the state that comes from renewable sources. That number is 25%. The mandate is 25% renewables by the year 2025. And they actually went a little bit further, and they said out of that 25%, there's a specific number of solar that's associated with that, and that's actually 3 gigawatts. So what's happened is developers all across the country have seen basically a good reason now to really ramp up efforts here in the state to start developing solar projects. Just to step back even a little bit further, when you hear the word solar, that could be associated with a few different things. I just want to clarify. Solar thermal is where you have an intricate array of mirrors that are purposely angled in such a manner to redirect sunlight into a central location. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about solar photovoltaics, or PV for short. That's kind of has the opposite goal. These are modules that are arranged to soak in as much sunlight as possible. They're actually treated with an anti-reflective coating so as to absorb sunlight. And the easiest way to think about it is, you know, sunlight in, electricity out. And not just Cypress Creek, but all developers in Illinois. When you think of solar in Illinois, we're talking about solar PV. To go a step further, solar PV can be arranged a few ways, and it can be mounted in a few different ways. There's a fixed tilt scenario where the panels are facing south at a fixed angle that they don't move at all. There's also something called single axis tracking, and that's where the modules will actually rotate super slowly throughout the day in an effort to soak in as much sunlight as possible. That's what we're talking about here. That's what our projects will feature in Illinois. I think that'll be the case for a lot of developers. So basically, just to give an idea of how those work, in the morning, those are facing east. By midday, when the sun's overhead, they're kind of flat. You know, if you picture a piece of paper, it's kind of like our table, kind of flat. And then in the afternoon, they're facing west. And again, the idea is to just soak in as much sunlight and create as much yield as possible so you can create as much electricity. Get the most bang for your buck, essentially. I wanted to show a few pictures. These give a really good idea of what kind of scale we're talking about here. The maximum height, as far as where the top of the modules would sit compared to the ground, would be 12 feet. That's a very high-end limit that would really never be reached. In reality, it's closer to 7 to 8 feet, as you see in this picture. And this picture also illustrates how they're supported. So you'll notice there's no concrete underneath this row of modules. And that's really a nice thing. I'll get to that a little bit more later. But they sit on steel posts that are driven into the ground. Here's another look kind of underneath an array. So you can, again, see that there's no gravel or concrete underneath the modules themselves. And then the wiring to connect all of the modules together is tucked in underneath the modules. Here's a picture of the tracking system that I referenced earlier, and this is a shot at midday. So you can see they're totally flat, and this kind of gives an idea of what they'll look like, as well as scale. Stepping back a little bit, we see a few more components of a solar farm. We've got a perimeter fence on the left, along with an access road, and then this kind of gives an idea of how the spacing of the rows. So the rows are not stacked right on top of each other. They're between 8 to 12, sometimes 20 feet apart. Mark, this will not be the first time that he reminds me of important things to say, and this is why he's great. So that picture, and I'll go back, you can see if you've got good eyes, that there's barbed wire on the top of that fence. In other markets, really, barbed wire hasn't been an issue as far as its aesthetics. Here in Illinois, one of the first things we heard was people didn't want to look at anything that resembles a prison. And that was the word I kept hearing over and over again. So very quickly we adjusted, and we needed the height. So that you're looking at there is a 6-foot chain link fence with basically 3 strands of barbed wire, which make it a 7 feet total fence. Here in Illinois, we're proposing a 7 feet, but in Kankakee County, now that I'm remembering from earlier this week, we're actually abiding by the code, which is an 8-foot chain link fence, a secure fence around the entire perimeter of a solar farm. I wanted to point out, solar farms are pretty simple. There's not a whole lot of components that make up the farm. We talked about the modules earlier. The inverter and transformer pair that's pictured on the right of this slide, that's the only equipment that sits on concrete, any sort of concrete. And we're not talking about a lot of concrete at all. It's about a 1-car garage worth, about a 20 by 10 slab on grade, about 4 inches thick of concrete. A 2 megawatt solar farm would likely have 2 sets of those. So maybe like a 2-car garage worth of concrete over about a 20-acre farm. So there's very, very little concrete on site. There's also combiner boxes. That's equipment that basically takes all of the modules that are in a row, combines them together before they get fed underground towards the inverter and transformer equipment. There's the wire and conductor cables that do just what I explained. Those are underneath in conduit, basically taking the electricity or the energy that's created from the modules and feeding it to the inverter and transformer. The inverter and transformer then will step up or down the voltage and convert it from DC to AC so it's ready to go into the grid. There's a structural racking system, which I talked about earlier. That's the steel posts with the rotating system on top of that. And then there's perimeter fencing. That's about it. Few more pictures. This is of the construction process. On the left, we have posts being driven into the ground. And you can see the equipment that's used to even drive the posts is not very big. I like pointing this out because sometimes our context might be wind. Wind is always a good thing or a natural comparison for solar because it's renewable. And it's something that we're all very familiar with here in this part of the country. We're different in many ways, and one way is basically the equipment and also the machinery used to install the equipment, much smaller scale. And that's what I like about this picture. That kind of shows that. And on the right, that's a picture of a site that's had all of its posts installed and its racking system, and that's just ready for modules to be installed. Agricultural impact, huge topic in many parts of the country, but Illinois certainly, and in Kankakee County certainly. Farmland is very important, and we recognize that. And one of the things we love about solar is, I mean, there's a number of things, right? But as it specifically pertains to farmland and the impact on ag, is that this is a temporary use. albeit we're talking about decades, hopefully. So it's a long period of time, but it is not a permanent reuse. We're not in here, as you guys know, asking for a zoning change. And I love that. So this will stay in the ag zone. We're asking for a special use permit, as Delbert and the team has created this ordinance which specifically allows for solar in an ag zone. And that's great because we're not impacting the land whatsoever. We're taking it offline in a live fallow for a while, and there's actually benefits to that, as you guys know, as many of you I'm sure have farming experience. There's benefits from not tilling the land each year. Field tiles, another big topic. I'm not going to talk too much about that because we have our civil engineer expert here with us, Dan Variotti, who will speak a little bit about drainage and field tiles and our process for locating them, designing around them, and our procedures should we need to repair and replace them at any point in the life of a solar farm. So Dan will cover that, but I want to highlight that that's a really important issue, and we understand that, and we've spent, even before really taking any formal zoning steps, we spent a lot of time researching, what are the ways to determine where the tiles are. I mean, we spent, we just understand that this is a big issue here. And then we will, as far as cover cropping, native grasses, slow growth, 24-inch max growth is what will be spec'd, and that'll be on a case-by-case basis, right? We'll evaluate the soil conditions and spec the best kind of ground cover. Couple of pictures of completed solar farms. So we don't have any in Illinois, and that's really a function of just the state not being ready, and obviously that's changing now. But some neighboring states were kind of a little bit further along, including Indiana. So we have 3 operating solar farms that we developed in Indiana. I've got pictures of 2 of them. These are a little bit larger in scale. These are 5 megawatt farms, so a little bit more than double what we're proposing for each of our sites here. This covers about 45 acres. On the left is just a drone shot, so that's kind of a bird's eye. And on the right is a picture just taken from the street. So this shows you a perspective from the ground. Same thing here on the left, above shot and a ground shot on the right. This is a separate solar farm, but same size. Also, and just for reference, in case you guys were interested in getting over to Indiana, we're actually really close to Indiana here, but this is a little bit further south. This is west central Indiana near Terre Haute. All 3 of our farms are kind of in the Terre Haute region. I want to highlight there's no safety risks at all to the community when we're talking about solar PV. And that starts from the very beginning. I mean, they're engineered by licensed civil, structural, and electrical engineers. We go through all the typical permitting process, erosion, stormwater, and sediment control processes, and we obtain the necessary permits for all of those functions. Everything's designed by licensed engineers. We are compliant with the National Electric Code, NEC, also local and national building codes. As far as when we have a completed solar farm, from a safety perspective, as I mentioned earlier, there's a perimeter fence around the entire solar farm. That's actually part of the National Electric Code, but that's something that we would do voluntarily as well. I mean, we want to keep a nice, tidy site that's secure. There'll be a Knox box for emergency services to be able to access, for our team to be able to access. We also maintain the vegetation just to ensure there's no overgrowth. We don't want any weeds growing through our panels to block sunlight. We also want to keep a nice looking site. What's cool about solar too is that they're monitored remotely. So we don't have anybody sitting on the site, but we're able to see the performance. And if there's any issues, we know, and then we can send somebody out, and we'll send a local qualified electrician who can work on solar farms to do some maintenance and do some inspection and investigation. Now, it's estimated that we're only doing that a couple times a year. Very minimally are we out at the site. We're also out at the site once a quarter, maybe a little bit more, depending on the condition, to do mowing and trimming of vegetation. Solar PV plants are extremely quiet. There's really only one piece of equipment on the site that makes any sort of noise, and that's that inverter and transformer pair I talked about earlier. There's essentially a fan inside the inverter that keeps it cool during the day when it gets hot. And if we were standing right next to it and talking, we could still have this conversation without the microphone, actually. It's kind of like a vacuum cleaner or a big fan type of noise. So when you're outside of 150 feet from that equipment, you can't even hear it at all. And that's actually what that white circle represents there in the bottom right of the slide. That's a 150-foot radius. And we always locate that equipment internal to the site so that it's nowhere near property lines. Actually, the same thing goes for electromagnetic fields, or EMFs. First of all, it's important to note that everything in nature produces EMFs, from our cell phones, our TVs, our appliances, power lines, everything does. There's nothing on a solar farm that creates these at unsafe levels at all. That same equipment, the inverter transformer pair, is the strongest or the highest source. And again, that individual is over there totally safe. I've been on a number of solar farms kind of milling around that equipment, totally safe. But I also do want to point out that outside of 150 feet from that equipment, same as the sound kind of radius, you can't detect any EMF at all. A number of benefits of local solar from an environmental perspective, from kind of a, if you want to participate in kind of the renewables revolution, this is a really good way to feel good about renewables being created without you personally having to invest. Before the idea of community solar existed, you had to go out, and there's nothing wrong with this. I think this is great, but you had to go out and put modules on your roof. But that's not right for everybody from a number of reasons. It's a significant investment. You have to have a roof that faces south. It has to be structurally secure. I mean, there's a whole lot of things. So having a community solar farm that you either subscribe to or just having it in the area is just a way to participate and just feel good about renewable energy being created in your community. That, by the way, is not using any water at all. So it's not a drain on any resources at all. It's a wonderful, clean way to create power. They're quiet. They're virtually self-sufficient, as I mentioned earlier. Extremely low profile, right? Essentially, everything is below 10 feet. So you're not, it's not sticking out like an eyesore. And then there's a significant economic growth component. And what's nice is when we're here talking about 9 projects, as we are today, that grows up or adds up quickly and kind of gets multiplied. And I've got an exhibit later on that I'll show you that kind of what the job numbers are and what the expectations are from a going forward basis on an annual basis. So there's jobs, construction jobs. There's also some recurring money spent on upkeep and maintenance of the solar farm. And then there's a property tax component. So right now these farms are assessed and taxed as farmland. And as we all know, that's a very low number. And so while there's not total clarity into what the tax bill is going to look like for these solar farms once they're created, we have an idea. We have basically a low-end number. And I'll just share that number now, which is approximately $10,000 per 2 megawatt solar farm per year. But that's compared to, I think we looked at a line eye, for example, at $650 or something like that.
650 the whole farm is 360, I think.
For the acreage that's covered by the solar farm was like 350. So $350 compared to 10,000 per year. So a massive boon. And the great part about that is that comes with no costs, right? There's no additional students at the school. So the schools are going to get the bulk of that, but there's no additional students that come with it. There's no need for additional services, no utilities, as I mentioned earlier, water or anything. So it's a really good opportunity for some economic benefits in the communities that host these. And then on the environmental side, totally safe for wildlife and birds, no long-term impact on the environment at all. There's zero emission. There's no opportunity for anything for the panels themselves to leach into the ground or into the air. I do want to touch up on one thing because sometimes it's a topic, and particularly like after the hurricane, the unfortunate hurricane that hit Puerto Rico. If there's some sort of catastrophic event that were to break the panels, they break in such a way, they're tempered glass essentially. You think of it as a windshield. So there's no chance that any shards of glass enter anywhere. It's one sheet of kind of crumpled up glass as we've all seen when tempered glass breaks, which is really great because it makes cleanup easy and it's also really good for the environment. Okay, this is our kind of combo slide that I sort of alluded to earlier. So we're talking about 9 separate 2 megawatt solar farms, and that's where that capacity at 18 megawatts comes from. So if we kind of run through, when you look at these as 9 projects, it's a nice way to kind of quantify the benefits, right? So this is enough estimated to power over 2,800 homes when you're talking about 18 megawatts. I talked about municipal services. So solar farms are passive neighbors. They don't require any additional county services whatsoever. And we're talking about a total investment in the neighborhood of $35 million over these 9 farms. And that equates to a whole bunch of spending, local spending during construction, approximately $40 million, but also an annual spending component, because we do need to maintain them on a vegetation basis and also some operational maintenance. And that, again, across 9 farms, adds up to a nice number. It's about a $250,000 ongoing annual expense that we're estimating. As far as local jobs during the construction period on these 9 farms, they total about 225. Again, another, nice large number. So now I'd like to hand it off to Dan Variotti, who is a civil engineer with TRC, as Mark introduced earlier. He's going to talk kind of big picture drainage stuff when it comes to solar farms. And then after he's done, we're going to bring up Drew Lyons, who is from Cone Resnick. He's with the appraisal firm Mark referenced earlier. He'll be able to talk about impact or lack of impact on property values of neighboring land to solar farms. So. Oh, we could do however you'd like to do it. I'm happy to answer questions now. Yeah.
One slide didn't make sense to me personally. You have a $35 million investment and a $41 million construction cost.
I think we have a typo on that one.
That's the one I was looking at.
Yeah. That's okay. That's it. First of all, I love that you're looking at it with a keen eye, because that's how we can correct ourselves. So we just multiplied it by 18 instead of by 9. It was just a math error.
Okay, very good.
And hopefully that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to park it here while Dan takes the stage.
Good morning. Great to be here. Thanks for the invite. My name is Dan Variotti. I'm a licensed civil engineer in 8 states, including Illinois. I have over 20 years of practical experience with site development projects. And obviously, the new thing been going on for a few years. What's ramping up in Illinois, especially, is the solar farm development. So we, as a company, provide a variety of services to various, solar developers. Cypress Creek is one of our best clients, and we work with them, providing a range of services from, say, natural resources all the way to engineering and construction. The 2 main components of engineering, and by the way, there's a lot of engineering areas involved with a solar farm, from the initial planning all the way to construction. We're talking civil, structural, and then obviously we have a variety of sub-consultants and in-house services for electrical, so many things. But I'm here to talk about the water resources. 2 main areas of water resources, the surface drainage and obviously the subsurface drainage, which is the drain tile. So what we do is, as a first step, we compile. This is a typical process. This is the big picture, so I'm going to try to summarize it. The county data, all the surface information, the topographic information, 1-foot contours, we compile that in a base map, and then obviously that's the first step. Then we go visit the site to understand the drainage patterns, and then we do a detailed topographic survey, which will refine the county GIS data. Right after that, we then will do a numerical analysis. We analyze, the existing versus the proposed conditions for stormwater management. At that point, obviously, we follow the very comprehensive county stormwater management guide. And, I got to say, it's very complete. It's a very good set of rules. And obviously, we will coordinate with the county engineer on the stormwater plan. So, the main thing here to understand is that there is no single farm that's independently as a sub-watershed. There's always going to be a connection, hydraulic connection with the neighboring properties. So that's why, you know, at that point in the game, we really need to see what's going on and what are the changes, if any, you know, due to the proposed solar farm, the proposed conditions. What we see, and this is applying to all the solar farm developments that we're working on, when we go from and change, you know, the surface from single row crop to, say, a proposed solar farm with a meadow-like pasture, all the native Illinois grasses, two things will happen. The infiltration rates increase and the amount of runoff, what's moving away, the water moving from the site, decreases. So this is a great advantage to, say, the stormwater management plan. The other benefit is we have less solids, you know, moving away from the site. So when, say, we have a 100-year storm, let's say 8 inches of rain in 24 hours, the amount of water moving away from the site decreases, and so does, you know, the amount of total suspended solids. So it's a great sediment control, you know, measure that we have because of the meadow-like surface we have. And let's keep in mind, I think this is something that we all need to recognize. The root system of the meadow-like grasses that we're putting in, they go much deeper than, say, the crops. And it's, you know, we're talking 3 to 5 feet. So for that reason, you know, that's a net benefit for the infiltration rates. The other secondary but equally important element is the subsurface drainage. So the drain tile, I've seen a couple, but except a couple in Illinois, all the drain tile system is interconnected. That means it's connecting to the neighboring properties. So one solar farm will not drain just that particular site. You will have a connection with all the neighboring properties. So what we do is at the beginning of the project, right after the special use permit application is you know, in place, we go to the site and we identify the drain pipes. We do light excavation, we flag the pipes, the alignments, we bring them into GPS and then in the base map. Obviously, I can talk about the specific methods, but I'm just going to summarize it. So we identify all the mains, all the inverts, and obviously in the engineering phase, we have it as a goal. We got to be away when driving posts from the location of the drain tiles. If during the construction of the project, and you know, sometimes it happens, it doesn't happen with the mains, but it happens with the lateral pipes, smaller diameter pipes coming into the mains. It's you know, probably not because of the driving, it's because of the system, clay pipes being old, 100 years they break. It's, you know, we all need to recognize, you know, sooner or later, these pipes will break, no matter what we do, and even without anybody being on site. Again, clay pipes, 100 years old, you do the math, it can happen. The developer, you know, is committing to replacing these pipes, and we're gonna put in a better material, which is plastic, polyethylene, usually, and we're gonna replace that particular pipe that breaks or sections of the pipe on a larger scale. And I think for that reason, you know, we have the, it's in the best interest of not only the neighbors to have an existing and working drain tile system, but also the developers. We can allow standing water on site. So for that reason, you know, we have to fix anything we see or, you know, something that happens during the operation or the construction of the project. So at the end of the project, what we want to do after everything is out, obviously that's going to be a final inspection. And again, it will be our main goal to have a working drain tile system like it is now. And lastly, I want to summarize it by saying it is our main goal not to interfere with the existing drainage, maintain it, and improve it. We're not bringing any imported soil. We're not changing the grade. We're not really doing anything. This is, you know, the least invasive procedure that, you know, we can think of in terms of keeping the site the way it is right now.
Question, Mr. Hildebrand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the drainage area, now, you say grasses will be planted there. How do you get the grass to grow underneath the panels if the sun's not hitting them?
Well, they do. Let's keep in mind these panels move. So during the time of the day, depending on the time of the day, obviously they will get sunlight. And, you know, usually we, it is a going back and forth type of process with the state of Illinois folks, the Soil Conservation District, and some other, you know, nonprofit usually organizations that target particular types of grasses that also supports some wildlife. You know, we typically see this one coming back to us all the time, you know, incorporating some wildflowers for bees. So the mix will be selected, like I said, in close collaboration with the state and usually the soil conservation folks. But keep in mind, all area, including under the panels, all these areas will grow the grasses pretty good. And we're talking, you know, 12, 18 inches or so in terms of height, but they'll also be maintained, mowed a few times a year, but they grow pretty good.
Probably under the panels, it probably wouldn't grow as fast.
Yeah, that is correct. You know, we're gonna see a slight difference in terms of, you know, growth rate, but they usually, you know, occupy all the area within the solar farm perimeter.
And also one more question, and forgive me because I'm sort of, you know, this is new to me. The solar panels, to me, look like a giant roof or whatever. There'll be a lot of water runoff from this particular area into one localized area. Will this increase the, sort of like a rooftop where the water will be channeled to one area and run off faster? Will there be a need for holding ponds or anything like that? Are we going to use roadside ditches for drainage, or what are we using for the runoff?
Yeah, great question. We typically, you know, obviously look at that. So the amount of runoff decreases, let's keep that in mind, because of the infiltration rates increasing. What we found is that, you know, it will be a temporary, say, concentrated flow at the edge of the panel. You know, obviously it's a temporary, say, small erosion that we're going to create. When you say have a rainfall with 2.5 inches per hour worth of intensity, but, you know, because of the panels, you know, move, you will not have that water, you know, kind of being channelized in one spot. And overall, we have a lot of area between the solar arrays. Let's keep in mind, typically we got 20-foot, you know, spacing between the arrays, and the panels move. So it's not like, you know, for 24 hours we're gonna have that water, you know, kind of being funneled down in just one line, one location by itself. So the detention requirements do not typically apply to the solar farm facilities in Illinois, because the amount of runoff we get is less than, you know, the crops.
And also, like you, not the engineer on this, from a simple standpoint, you'd asked about gutters, you know, coming off a house. These don't have gutters. So you're not looking at it coming to a single point from the whole farm where it dumps down. It actually comes off the panel straight to the ground. And remember, because we're not a fixed panel system, because they rotate, it's also not landing in the same place. So over time, that's moving where it goes to. But I mean, you raise a great question, but if I understood it correctly, you're questioning if there were gutters along there, water collects and goes off at one point. No, water comes off throughout the entire farm. So,
yeah, the solar farm is being treated as an open field. And obviously this is a discussion we had with all the stormwater folks in various counties. They think it's great for the infiltration rates, and given, you know, the spacing available for the water to infiltrate, nobody thinks, you know, we have an issue.
Have you found hail to be an issue?
Well, you know, and Scott will be more than happy to talk about, you know, the test with the golf, the test with the golf ball. But you know, it's tempered glass. Everything, you know, that they do, and the testing nowadays, you know, is specially designed for big hail. And in terms of, you know, since you're talking about that, all the system is rated not only for big hail, but also for, you know, at least an F1 type of tornado. So, I mean, these systems are pretty sturdy. Okay. So obviously they've gone through a lot of testing, and especially for Illinois, we have, you know, the best application, not only for the PV panels, but also for the support system itself.
Thank you. Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I appreciate the thought on, you know, it's in your best interest to have the water mitigated on the site, because it obviously impacts the way that you guys can do your business. And it makes me think about, well, what about the sites next to the property? And the assumption that there are no drainage issues present, or that there is no historical drainage issues, there's no ponding, and then all of a sudden solar farm comes in and they start having ponding. I guess I would like to know how you guys address that, because it may not, the history may not be known to you, or how do you investigate that? How do you look at the surrounding properties to say, you know, that either this has historically happened, or this is something new, we need to address what's happened on this site?
Yeah, we typically compile all that information as known. Especially during the survey, we don't just survey our property, that is to be developed. For the drain tile, for example, we always go a good 100 foot, past the property limits. Why? We really need to understand the relationship between neighboring properties and ours. Also, during the site visit and survey, we identify all the hydraulic structures. So when it comes down to, say, at least the surface water, I'm assuming that's what you refer to, we coordinate that information with the stormwater folks. And when we do the existing conditions versus the proposed conditions, we then study the surface water drainage, and obviously that's the relationship with the neighboring properties. If, for example, at that point, let's say we have a culvert under the road, and it's a deficiency not on behalf of the property that we want to develop, on behalf of the adjacent property, that's something we discuss with the stormwater folks. At that point, they might decide to, modify the structure as needed. But again, it's not really under our control, but at least we'll have all that information, quantified in the stormwater management plan phase.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Lines. I don't have quite the same kind of lyrical quality to my voice that Dan does, so I hope that you'll bear with me this morning. I work for a company called Cohn Resnick. We are actually an accounting, audit, tax, and advisory firm. We're a top 10 accounting firm nationwide, and I'm in the advisory division. We perform valuation advisory services for a wide variety of real estate and business clients. Impact studies for companies like Cypress Creek are something that we do consistently. We perform impact studies on a wide range of properties that some people believe are a deleterious use. It might cause some property impact to adjacent properties. Those include landfills, waste transfer stations, big box retail, rock quarries, and transmission corridors. And so we study all of those kind of things. So we're really excited to start working with Cypress Creek about a year ago and starting to compile data on adjacent property around existing solar farms in Illinois and then also in Indiana. So Patricia McGarr, who is my boss and heads up, she's the national director of our valuation division. She's an MAI, a counselor of real estate. She's also a fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, which is a mouthful. And she leads our program. She's been doing impact studies for over 30 years and has helped train me and the rest of our staff. Last year, she was appointed by Governor Rauner to be vice chairman of the Department of Financial Professional Regulations for the Real Estate Appraisal Board. So she's somebody who speaks with very high authority about the way things should be done in the confines of evaluation or a property impact study. Myself, I'm also an MAI, a member of the Appraisal Institute. I'm licensed here in Illinois, also in Indiana, and in 8 other states across the United States. I am a partner with the firm, and I manage about 35 individuals across 7 different cities in the United States.
I should also add that Delbert has a copy of his credentials for the board for that would like to see it.
I'd also like to mention that Ms. McGarr was the person who actually testified at the hearings.
That's correct. We prepared a much larger and detailed impact study report. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Wheeler? Thank you. Since we're on that subject, sometimes people have the impression that the expert brought in by the company, is he going to provide the answers that the company wants to hear? And I've actually heard that a couple of times from the public. Can you discuss a little bit of your licensing and ethical requirements and the reporting methods that you'd have to deal with?
Absolutely.
And that you're held to?
Sure. So first of all, as a member of the Appraisal Institute, I'm bound by complying with certain business and practical ethics in my day-to-day business program. Also, as an appraiser, we follow the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. If any of you have ever received an appraisal on your house, USPAP is the term that most appraisers will coin and that banks will coin. And so those are federal guidelines that we all have to adhere to in order to maintain the public trust. There's no way that Pat or myself would ever produce an appraisal report that would be misleading to the public in any way, or that would include any bias that we might have personally or financially. So we maintain our independence through every single one of our projects. So I'm bound by the Appraisal Institute as a member. I'm bound by complying to USPAP, and I'm bound by state legislation with regards to my state appraisal license. All right, good stuff. So again, we prepared a fairly large and detailed impact study. I'm just going to try to take you through on a slide deck, which is just kind of a summary of what we did. But essentially, a property impact study, we used a paired sales analysis. So we looked at existing solar farms that have been around for a few years. We studied all of the adjacent properties around those solar farms. We tried to identify those that have sold in the last 5 years. And then we went out and we tried to find comparable data from similar agricultural uses, single-family residential uses, located in generally the same market area, but physically removed from the solar farm. And by studying the two different kinds of sales, a target area, which is the properties that are immediately around the solar farm, which some might believe might be potentially impacted by the solar farm, to properties that are removed further away, maybe a mile away, that we know there's no way that they're going to have any kind of influence by the solar farm. And we compare those sales points. And the difference between the two should show a measurable impact. And if there is no measurable and consistent data, right, that shows that there are vast differences in sale prices or prices per unit, then we can conclude that there probably is no impact as caused by the solar farm itself. So Scott had mentioned that the state of Indiana has had a lot more solar development over the last 5 and 10 years than Illinois, and this is true. So unfortunately, we were only able to study 3 existing solar farms here in the state of Illinois. The rest we were able to find in the state of Indiana. And it really ran the gamut as far as sizes. So there were very comparable solar farms that were on small acreages and were 1 to 1.5 megawatts in total capacity. And then there were others, which were as high as 27 megawatts and covered 160 acres. So we were really able to study a kind of a wide array of different solar projects. And I'll get into a few of them here. But after studying 9 of them, in Indiana and in Illinois, we could not identify any measurable and consistent difference between target areas and control areas, which led us to believe that there was no impact to adjacent property values. And as I'll show you a little bit later, we also discussed this with market area participants. So we talked to brokers, we talked to people who lived next to the homes, and we talked to assessors in all of the townships and counties where these solar farms exist. And nobody told us that they felt there was any impact by the solar farms whatsoever. So how do we know that we're doing the right thing? This is our Bible for real estate damages. It was written by an MAI named Randy Bell. In the future, if you ever have an appraiser come up here and say that they've done a property impact study, ask them if they know Randy Bell. And if they don't, you might not have might not have done a great job. But specifically, the book details exactly how we're supposed to approach this kind of assignment. What's the data science required in order to draw out meaningful conclusions? As Randy Bell states, if a legitimate detrimental condition exists, there will likely be a measurable and consistent difference between the two sets of market data. If not, there will likely be no significant difference between the two sets of data. And so Mr. Bell talks a little bit about how to define the target areas, how to define control areas. And so we've prepared our impact studies aligned with how Mr. Bell reports they should be within that textbook. So, go ahead. Sure.
Is that through like p-values where you're drawing statistical significance between the different data sets? Is that how he's doing it?
So he has many different kinds of analysis that he used. we're using a paired sales analysis where the only element that we need to adjust for is time. When he talks about some of the other statistical analyses, which are sometimes used in mass appraisals, right? They grab an entire set, right, of data points, maybe 10 or 15,000 data points, and they use a very complex and complicated way of mathematically adjusting for 100 to 150 different variables. This is a more simplified way of doing it, where you're selecting one and you're finding some comps in a very small area. And so, part of that is that there aren't as many sales, right, located in fairly rural communities for us to examine. So we're doing the best that we can, and we think the paired sales analysis approach is the best way to explore whether or not there is or there isn't an impact. Okay. So one of the ones we studied is in Streeter, LaSalle County. Obviously, you can see this is a pretty large solar array. And so we took a look at this, and what we did is we go and we find every single tract, right, that has its own property identification number around that existing solar field. And we try to see which ones have sold. This particular solar farm was opened in 2012, right? So looking at the last 5 years, only one of these properties actually sold within that time frame. So we went out, it was a single family home. And so we identified 5 other sales of very similar single-family homes in terms of size, acreage, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. And we compared the average of those prices per square foot to the same one as the subject property. As you can see here, it actually showed it was just a little bit over 5% that the property directly adjacent to the solar farm was higher than the controls located away from the solar farm. So with this study, we couldn't really conclude that there appeared to be any meaningful difference. Here's the next one. This was in Porter County, Indiana. And so this one had both agricultural and single-family uses. It had a row of single-family uses at the southeast corner of the site. In this particular study, we were able to compare not only farm acreage sales, but also single-family sales. And you can see, again, with the agricultural acreage, there was about a 4% difference in favor of the property that was directly adjacent to the solar field. And remember, these have been existing for a number of years. And with the single-family homes, again, a completely insignificant difference between the target and control areas. Here's one in Frankton, Indiana. Really like this one. It's a fairly small site. I think it's only about 13 acres. It had agricultural uses along one side, and then it had a bunch of single-family uses on the other side. And so when we broke these down, we were able to pinpoint 2 adjacent properties that had sold immediately next to the solar farm. And what was really great about this study is that the owner of Sales 7, who had been there before the solar field was put in, he was really nervous when he found out that the planning board was thinking about allowing a solar field in behind his house. And he told us that after 3 years of living with it, he barely heard it. He barely remembered that it was there. It was a really good, quiet neighbor. And he didn't believe that it was preventing him from selling his home or having kind of impact on his home whatsoever. So again, we looked at sales of similar homes in both of these cases, and there were no meaningful differences there. Here's a really big one in Indianapolis. This is probably one of the best studies that we did because, as you can see on the north side of the property, there's a big row of houses that are all contained within the same subdivision. You guys know when you guys have subdivisions built in your towns that it's usually one builder, it's the same kind of homes. And that's really a great way for a data scientist to explore and see if there's any impact because you're dealing with a lot of cookie cutter homes. There were some ag uses around the south side of it. I don't believe that we identified any sales immediately around the solar field to the south. But on the north side, with the subdivision that's just across the street, we found 6 sales that had occurred after the solar farm opened in 2013. Most of them sold in 2014 and 2015, and then we had 2 sales that occurred last year in 2017. What was really great about this study as well is that the, it's not showing up on the screen, the home builder that built the target properties immediately across the street, we were able to analyze homes within the north side of that same subdivision. And then he also built some homes about a mile north, where you see some other blue dots, and then about 2 miles to the west, where he also built a little row of homes. So the same builder, same kind of houses, same kind of housing stock. All the statistics are very similar to each other. And again, we didn't find any difference or significant difference with any of the homes in the first target group or in the second. And you can see we're drawing from the same areas in trying to identify whether or not a property has been influenced by the solar farm or not. So here's a summary of our findings for all the 9 sites that we examined. There was one outlier in Middlebury that showed 27% higher right next to the solar farm. That was more due to the home itself being a lot smaller than any of the comparable data around it. But ultimately, at 3.9% average for all, really is very minimal and statistically insignificant. So we could not find any consistent negative impact occurring to any adjacent property around any of the solar farms that we studied. Here's some of the market commentary. Again, we interviewed a number of assessors. None of them said that they saw any property impact. These are people who see sales of homes over and over and over again in their communities. They would be the first people to know it, and they couldn't find any. Not only that, one of the assessors said that nobody's even noted it when they fought their taxes. Which one?
Okay, right there. No, I'm sorry, you were there. There.
Okay.
I also want to make clear, and we're not trying to argue that the solar farm will actually net increase the adjacent properties, but when we're talking 3.9%, you actually mean that the net increase you found was that the properties closer to the solar farm went up 3.9% higher than the properties that were farther away. Again, we're not trying to make the argument this will cause houses to go up, but I didn't want you to think that we were saying there's a 3.9% decrease next to the solar farm. Thank you.
That's absolutely correct. Finally, I'd like to show you that these solar farms haven't impacted estate home development, which I know can be a really big concern in your community. This was a 10-acre site. It was kind of a long, narrow site next to the Dominion Indy site in Indianapolis. After the solar farm was constructed, a doctor came in and he built an extremely large estate home with an in-ground pool within 150 feet, not just of the property line, but of the physical PV panels themselves. And there was another one where somebody had come in and purchased some acreage, put in a pond and a brand new estate home, and the assessor told us that the value was going to be, probably in excess of $500,000 on the home, and that was directly next to a very large existing solar farm. And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
I've got a couple. Why limiting it to around 20, 25 acres here when you see much larger ones?
Well, now I feel short. That's a great question. And we as a company, I'll step back a little bit. We as a developer, we do projects that are larger than 20 acres. It's a function of really, there's a number of things we look for when we look for development opportunities of solar farms. So we look for proximity to the grid, relatively flat land, and then with excess capacity in the existing grid infrastructure in the immediate area to be able to take that power online. Now, there are, it's almost more of a coincidence that it happens to be that here in Kankakee County, we're piling up projects that are of the smaller size. Because again, as a company, we do both. At one point, we were looking at a larger project in the county you may have heard about. We called it Bonfield Solar. For a number of reasons, that development didn't even make it to the zoning stage. There was environmental concerns, there were other due diligence issues, and there was fitting into the community issues. I mean, there was a lot of things that kind of piled up that said, you know what, this development is not going to, you know, pencil out for us. And that's a good reminder of right now, we're in one stage of the development process. We're in the zoning stage here. There's a number of things that need to come together for a development to come to fruition and for a shovel to actually be inserted into the dirt. So there's no great answer to say, why don't we have a 200-acre solar farm that we're proposing before you today, other than to say that with the combination of the proximity to the grid, capacity on the grid, and willing landowners, we've compiled a development pipeline that happened to fit into this 2 megawatt bucket here in the county that we're presenting today.
The examples you had of much larger ones in the country, how was their grid better than what our grid is here?
It's actually not so much that their grid is better than yours. There could very well be a scenario where if everything else comes together well, there is enough capacity for a 20 megawatt or even a 50 megawatt project here in the county. And I wouldn't even say that that's not going to happen. I know we don't have immediate plans for that, but potentially another developer does. I would say, again, it just points more to the specific opportunities that have arisen at this time are of the smaller variety, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then my last question, why isn't ComEd doing this?
So ComEd is actually prohibited from owning power generation sources in the state. It's a deregulated state system. So ComEd is responsible for actually supplying. So they have the distribution network to actually take energy that's created somewhere and then deliver it to our homes. But they're not the ones who actually develop and own these power generation facilities. However, they're very much excited, on board, putting a lot of upfront effort into making this process really user-friendly, both from a developer's perspective and from a ratepayer, a subscriber to these solar farms. I haven't really gotten into that much. What's nice about the 2 megawatts compared to the larger farms that you were asking about and that Drew was talking about is 2 megawatts and under is in the state's community solar program. And this is a really good scenario because it allows and invites local residents and businesses to actually subscribe to individual solar farms. The state allows you to actually take anyone from the ComEd territory and have them subscribe to any solar farm in the ComEd territory. However, our philosophy for achieving subscribers is to kind of go inside out, right? We want locals to have an opportunity because there's benefits. In addition to understanding, you know, you can be part of this renewables, and that's benefits for a number of reasons, but also lower electricity rates. You know, there's a significant discount associated with those who subscribe into these facilities so that they can get access to cheaper power.
Are there suppliers in other parts of the United States who are allowed to do this?
Yeah, there's different types of markets. So it depends on the state, but there are states where power providers can also be power generators as well. It's just a different functionality of how the states are run.
Do you deal with those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we do.
Any other questions? Mr. Mulcahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned in the Bondfield incident some reasons that it did not take off, being environmental impact one of them. Could you cite what type of environmental concerns do the solar farms impact on the land?
That's a great question, and that one was a very specific one. So as part of our due diligence on all projects, and this is actually required, is we have to file with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources for what's called an EcoCat, and that's a survey of any species that could be in the area that could be affected by typically construction, not so much the existence of a solar farm because of its low impact and it's completely safe for animals, but really construction. And there was a species that was flagged in this instance. It was actually a box turtle. And it wasn't to the point where that box turtle alone would cause us to pull a plug, because that was like an initial take. you have like an initial take and then you do more research. The agencies study it more in depth. Well, when was the last time a turtle was sighted in the area and things like this, because there could be old information. And then even if it is identified that they're in the region, there's ways to kind of mitigate and figure that out. But that was an example of something that, we preferred not to have to disrupt any local wildlife, right? Like, and that's one of the beauties of solar development is it doesn't have an impact. But if there's an endangered species that's in the area, that's something that we find out about through our investigation, and then we evaluate which route we want to take. On Bonfield Solar, there was also, it was a large site. It was a 50 megawatt site. And we needed to cross a road and we needed to secure easements. We also, the larger the site, maybe the more kind of investment is needed in the grid infrastructure. So all of this was adding to a situation where, we had all these other great opportunities in the county. Why don't we focus on kind of the community solar aspect and not the utility scale? And that's kind of why we stopped that. But hopefully that helps as far as the environmental perspective.
Mr. Kinzinger.
My question would be more for the engineer, and he did address very adequately surface drainage and no concerns, but I am a contractor, underground contractor. I've been involved in situations where in driving a piling or something, I cut a pipe, didn't know it because you don't know it, and 200 feet away in adjoining property, all of a sudden they say they have water, and I say, don't look at me, I didn't do it. I did do it. Is there any way that can be addressed? I mean, you can't tile maps. What is there something to be done? Have you had that experience?
Before Dan will address aspects of that, but I want to highlight tile mapping is something we're committing to doing for a number of reasons. One, for fitting into the neighborhood and not doing what you're explaining to our neighbors, because that's the last thing we want to do. We want to be a good member of the community, and we want to do that by not causing rifts with our neighbors and affecting other land. So we are prepared to hire a drain tile surveyor. And we know that this exists because we did a bunch of research and have identified a couple of shops that specifically do this. And again, they may not be 100% accurate. Now, with the main lines, the lines that are feeding off the property, what we've been told and what we've learned is those tend to be very, very, very accurate. So we know where the main lines are that lead off the property, and we're not going to touch that area. If there's a lateral feeder, smaller pipe, 4 to 6 inch, that maybe isn't identified completely and that breaks, that's a situation we're going to watch. The good news is we know that we can go in after construction is done and connect the series of drain tile around the existing infrastructure. I don't know if I'd prefer to have a more engineering answer than my spiel.
No, I'm just concerned with the adjoining properties that may develop problems, and I also understand everybody tries to take advantage of situations also as a contractor. I just was curious as to how you handle those kind of situations.
No, I think it's, obviously part of the big picture. What do we do to watch, something like that to prevent that from happening? So you are right. I mean, from the practicality of construction, you just said you have experience with that. As Scott said, we'll know for sure what the main drain lines are. These are typically, 8 to 12 inches diameter. Again, clay pipes. We'll also know with good accuracy, this is not 100% science here, where the laterals, are coming in to feed into the mains. These are typically smaller, as Scott said, diameter pipes, typically 3 to 5 inch. Now, usually when you drive the support piles, you're not going to hit the mains. It's almost guaranteed we're not going to touch anything because we know exactly where they are. The rate of success is about 100% identifying the mains. But the laterals, obviously it's a weird connection. It's never a straight pattern. Why? Because in Illinois, it's up to the owner of the property to actually maintain and install. So they can do that without a permit. So for that reason, it's never a regular grid. So you can see now we have the mains and 50-foot spacing, we're gonna have the laterals coming in. It's never like that. So for that reason, it's a wide and variable condition of the laterals. And yes, it will happen that we're gonna hit some. We're not gonna know all the time, you know, during the driving of the piles. The equipment nowadays, it's hydraulic, you know, operated. It's what you see, for example, on the side of a highway when, say, IDOT is driving their support piles for the guardrail. It's about the same thing, except it's not, you know, like a diesel hammer operated machine. It's hydraulically operated. And for that reason, because of the driving, you know, specifics of that pile, sometimes you're not going to know, the operator will not know when we hit one lateral pipe, which is pretty small and it's clay. It will break pretty quick. But now, within a day or two of one rainfall event, the water will pond right there. You're going to see a small hole forming exactly where that pipe break is. And that's, you know, us engineers figuring that out. Within a day or two of that happening, we need to find the contractor, bring them back, and we have a couple of details how to fix that. You are right in terms of it's complicated because, you know, the break will be, you know, close to or under one panel. But we're going to find the time of the day when the panel has the right angle. And obviously, we're going to use some very light equipment. Usually, we do slit trenching. It's not going to be more than 2 foot wide. And we will use a small, you know, light machine. And obviously, because we most of the time excavate only 3-4 foot down, we're going to fix it within a couple of hours.
I've got one other question. Cloudy days. Is there generation of electricity even during cloudy days, partly cloudy days?
Yeah. I live by, this is where my mom's insistence that I wear sunscreen on a cloudy day. I like to draw on that experience. It's actually the same thing applies here. So the rays are getting through the clouds. Now, without cloud cover, there's a more direct path. So the yield will be higher on perfectly sunny days, but overcast days also create electricity on a solar farm.
Okay. Good to know. Any other questions? Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you. And on that same note, now, what about you know, dust from farm fields getting on top of the panels? Does that obstruct anything?
So fortunately, we're in a part of the country that gets enough rainfall to not necessitate us to go out and clean the panels or to be concerned about what our neighboring farms are doing. So in certain parts of the country, say like the Northwest, where we're in like the high desert in Oregon, you know, there could go months without rain and it could be dusty. And then we'd be in a scenario where we send out and kind of clean the panels. But we just have enough natural moisture here to take care of the modules.
Okay. Mr. Witter.
Thank you. If it does get to the point you do have to clean the panels, what type of solvents do you guys use to clean the panels? What is used, you know?
So because I haven't been in markets where we've ever had to clean panels, I don't have an answer to that other than to tell you that we wouldn't be using anything that's harmful. But I would defer on that question, and I don't think I want to hand that to Dan either because I think he would make an assumption as well. You know, other than to say it would not be a harmful chemical, I can't answer that with much detail. Yeah.
I think it will be coming up in a future ZBA. It might be good to have that answer when it does come up, because there is an area that has perceived to be dusty that is not on the docket today. It just you might want to have that the next time.
Thank you.
Mr. Stauffenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. This might be for Delbert more so than you guys. Did the Farm Bureau attend any of these meetings?
They did not.
They did not. Have they notified in any way or just by?
They get a packet just like everyone else.
Okay, because I just wonder, you know, sometimes they're being a land person and taking land out of production, which we're taking quite a bit of land out of production. We're all worried about food and feeding the world, you know, so just wondered if they had any input or any.
They have not commented on any of these.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And I think as far as land out of production, it's about 200 acres countywide
right.
for these cases.
Right.
So it's,
Can I also answer that? We did meet with Chad Miller, went to the project. We actually have met with him on multiple occasions, well aware of it, taking their input. I would also say you lead me right into sort of our concluding comment on this part for going to the properties and I was going to give the chair credit for asking about the 2 megawatts and farming, why those sizes. One of the things we've heard from a number of people, and I'm going to read a testimony that was read on the public record as well at the public hearing, is that by using smaller solar farms, we're allowing people who have a larger farm, 100 acres, 80, 150, to have one portion of their farm that has a sort of market, a part of the farm where the income is not impacted by the market. So obviously every farmer has to deal with the agricultural markets, options, etc. They have a piece of their property that they know month in, month out generates income for them. And I'm going to let someone say it much better than me to close out our presentation. Testimony on the record from CBS this morning on February 8th by a farm owner, Winnell Witt Lefkowitz, who worked with CYPRESS on a solar farm on her property. And she said, "This property has been in my family for 3 generations. The long-term lease will help ensure that the property will stay in my family for my children and grandchildren, while helping to provide for my retirement. I'm also pleased that having this solar farm on my property will greatly increase the tax base and provide much needed revenue that can be used to improve the infrastructure and services for this small rural town in which I grew up. I can think of no better use for this property and no better company with whom to work." Can't say it better ourselves. Again, thank you very much. We're going to move into the second part of the presentation, which is to walk through the individual sites. And we'll be going in the same order that's in your packet for each of the ZBA matters that's before you.
Okay, we have quite a few of them. So, and you're going to notice a recurring theme, right? The numbers are the same on all 9 of these in terms of power capacity, which is 2 megawatts. The amount of land is generally in the neighborhood of 20, 25, maybe 30 acres tops. The shape is a little bit different on each of them. I'm going to start with Newman Solar. I believe that's the first one listed on the agenda.
Yes.
And I'll just point out the general location, which is at 6575 East 3500 South Road, outside of St. Anne. And what we have here, and this will be the case for all 9 of these, is kind of a locational image, which is represented on the left. The lighter shade of green, and some of these look a little bit different as far as the shading, but it's hopefully somewhat obvious as to what is the solar farm and what is not. So the lighter shade is representing the solar area. The green square, that's the full parcel, and that's why that's shown. But you can see the solar area is to the west. And then on the right side of the screen, we have a zoning site plan image, which is a general layout of how a 2 megawatt solar farm will look in this location. Yeah, it's hard to see, and I apologize. The screens are a little bit small, and unfortunately, the laser pointer doesn't work on a TV. But Mark is going to point out that the inverter pads, as I mentioned earlier, are central interior to the site. And the other thing to note here is you'll notice that we're on the western portion of this parcel. A lot of that had to do with just kind of positioning ourselves, away from the residents on the east side. And again, not because there's an impact on either the value or their, enjoyment of their property from any perspective at all, but more so because we understand that change is hard and somebody's often used to having a cornfield next door, and we just want to, minimize the unknowns and the impact of the unknown. So that's really all I have to say. And I think what we can do is just field questions, and I can turn it over to Delbert, and we'll be available to answer questions on each of these individual proposals.
Okay. Well, I believe the only thing I can really add is that on March 12th, the Zoning Board of Appeals held a public hearing on this particular case, and there were no objectors or present and no public comment on this one. And they voted 7-0 to recommend approval.
Do we need a motion on each individual one?
Yes.
Okay, motion to approve by Mr. Wheeler, seconded by Mr. Mulcahy. Now, any discussion? Mr. Lear.
Just clarify in my mind, we're talking ZBA's case 1803?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Mr. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, how is decommissioning addressed in our ordinance or in the proposals?
They have a preliminary decommissioning plan as part of your packets there and part of the application. Our ordinance requires them to give us a decommissioning plan with a bond according to the amount specified in that plan. That plan is reviewed every 3 years, and that amount is adjusted every 3 years based on what the new plan would say. No, well, there's a minimal amount based on the acreage. They do the plan and calculate what it would cost to decommission the site, and that is what they have to give us a bond on it. Now that takes into consideration, though, recycling value. So our ordinance does state that even if it had a positive decommissioning value, meaning that the recyclables were worth more than the cost to remove them, they still have to give us $1,000 per acre in a bond. So that's kind of an insurance policy just in case.
The estimated useful life is 20 years?
Actually, up to 40 years.
40, okay. All right. The contract is for how many years?
It's an initial term of 20 years,
Okay.
and then with options to extend up to 40 years. You know, our option.
Your option?
Yeah.
Not landowner can't say no.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Another note, the decommissioning bond has to be in place at the time of the building permit issuance.
Okay, we've got a motion on the floor. Any other questions, discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Going on to 1805.
04.
1804. Gerald Wagner.
Okay, so we call this Vulcan Solar Farm, or Vulcan Solar. This is located approximately 5500 West, 1000 South Road, outside of Kankakee.
To clarify, that's just east of the Vulcan Quarry by about, I think, a quarter mile, half mile.
Motion to approve.
Zoning Board of Appeal also voted to recommend approval 7-0. There was some public comment on this. Mr. Mark O'Connor, a neighboring property owner, had some questions about fencing locations and maintenance of the property. Those were all adequately answered. And a Mr. Ralph Riley from a Village of Limestone trustee asked if the village could be given more time to consider the request. It was explained to him that the village got the amount of notice as required by the state statute, and the zoning board felt that that was adequate.
Now a motion to approve.
Whichever.
By Mr. Wheeler, Mr. Kinzinger. Yes, Mr. Wheeler.
I'd rather than read the verbatim testimony, was he the representative of Mr. Riley given the opportunity to come here and make public comment, or are they advised?
That was during public comment.
Okay, but if the person wanted to research, not just Mr. Riley, but anybody, if they wanted to come before this committee, they could have come and also raised any concerns at this committee if in fact they needed time to research.
Yes, they could have.
Okay.
At the end of the vote on each case, we announce when it will come to the Planning and Zoning Committee.
Okay.
The time and location. So.
Okay. Mr. Wheeler made, no. Did you made the motion, and Mr. Kinzinger in a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Now, going on to 1805.
Jasper Solar. The next case will be Jasper 2. So these are kind of side by side 2 megawatt solar farms, but right now we're talking about Jasper Solar. And we're at approximately 13350 County Road North 232 East. That's at a Moments.
Okay, for Jasper 1, which is the one on the west side, lower corner, is the one we're talking about right now. That one was recommended for approval by the zoning board 7-0, and there were no objectors or public comment.
Motion to approve by Mr. Hildebrand, seconded by Mr. Ritter. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. And 1806.
Jasper 2 Solar on the east side of that image on the left. Same location.
Correct. That was also recommended for approval by the zoning board 7-0. There was one public comment. Mr. Mark O'Connor had questions again about field tile damage and how they would be repaired. It was not specific to this site. It was more of a general question, and they were answered by Mr. Viriotti.
Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Fairfield, seconded by Mr. Stauffenberg. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. ZBA case 1807.
This is Illini Solar. We're at 3960 West 1000 South Road, outside of Kankakee.
Illini Solar. This was the first case on the March 19th Zoning Board of Appeals. The Zoning Board did vote 7-0. That's on the 19th. Yeah. That'd be 5-0 to recommend approval. We did not have a full Zoning Board that night. There were 5 public comments. Mr. Kevin Prince, neighboring residents had questions about trash pickup, maintenance of the site, the decommissioning plan, and who is responsible for enforcing the zoning ordinance. They also had questions about how drain tiles were handled, and that is all in the transcripts of the meeting. Mark O'Connor spoke again, asked about drainage on the site and drainage tile maintenance. Marvin Menke was asked about a different special use request that will be coming up on another case, and asked about wind and tornado resistance, which was answered in the same fashion it was answered today. Dennis Baker, an adjoining property owner, asked about the decommissioning plan and was addressed the same as it was today. Mr. Robert Riley again asked for this one to be tabled for the village to have more time to look at it, and the same answer was given. We also received that about 3 o'clock that day, a letter from the mayor of the village of Limestone dated October 5th, 2017, asking the commission table the case to do additional research on the matter. The zoning board took all of that into consideration and still recommended that it be moved forward and be approved.
Is there a motion to approve? By Mr. Wheeler, seconded by Ms. Peters. Any questions? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Case 1808.
This is Mojo Solar, located at approximately 4450 South Warner Bridge Road, Kankakee.
Yeah, the actual property address is 4388 North 6500 West Road.
Thank you for that clarification.
It's actually addressed off the other road. This was also heard on March 19th. Zoning board voted 5-0 to recommend approval. One public comment, Mr. Terry Jensen stated that the land was not flat and that there were sand hills present. And that was answered with that solar farms need relatively flat land, not perfectly flat land. He also had questions concerning the amount of tax dollars that might be generated by the solar farm, and that was answered in the same generalities as it was today.
Motion to approve by Mr. Kinzinger, seconded by Mr. Fairfield, any discussion? Mr. Lear.
In regard to the comment that was raised, or the public comment on terms of the tax dollars generated by the solar farm, I have had a discussion with the supervisor of assessment that there is state legislation with two competing pieces of state legislation in terms of assessment of solar farms. I'll be bringing more information about those two competing legislations to the executive committee.
All right.
All right. Yeah, the answer right now is we just don't know, but it will be significantly higher than agricultural land.
It might be helpful if I could add a little bit of color there. Absolutely correct. The number that I shared, which was approximately $10,000 per 2 megawatt. So that is the baseline lowest it would be. That's even a conservative estimate based on millage rates for the competing bill, one of the bills that the industry presented, right? And then so the other bill that was just referenced was came from the Assessors Association, right? And so in reality, there's probably going to be a little meeting towards somewhere in between those, but I don't want to talk about a number that could potentially be lower, right? I want to set the bar at a realistic point where it could only go higher, and that's why I referenced the 10,000.
Mr. Wheeler.
Mr. Chairman, actually, this is something I've been working on as well. I've been speaking with our contacts down in Springfield, legislative people that are associated with those staffs, and the bill will move forward. That's down there. It's to that point. It will just be they're deciding on where that line is. There's really not competing bills. There's just competing numbers on how we're going to derive that assessment. So it's sponsored by Lou Lang, so it's pretty much at the highest levels of being driven. They've accepted what the assessors are saying. It's just a matter of where that ends up. So we will have something, I would imagine, shortly. It's just a matter of where that is. And I believe the number you gave was closer to what the industry's proposal was versus what.
That's right.
Good luck
understandably. Hey, we're all in marketing.
Hey, I
on
actually
some
wear
level.
I wear two hats, right? I need to get these projects approved. I kind of like high numbers on one hand.
I understand.
Of course, I have to answer to an investment committee on the other hand.
Exactly. So yeah, and Mr. Lear will probably have some more on that, but I can tell you that it's something that I've made sure that at least something is going to happen. And we will have, it's not going to be a lot of question marks on that for very long.
I'll put my money on the assessors and the legislators. Going on to case 1809. Didn't we vote? Oh, we did a motion and a second. Okay, 1808. As all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Now 1809.
Okay, this is Peterman Solar, located at approximately 3250 East Vanderkar Road, St. Anne.
Okay, this is directly across the street from the Village Roma Park along the railroad tracks. This also was heard on March 19th. Recommended approval by the Zoning Board of Appeals 5-0. There was one public comment from Mr. Larry Ladd, who's an adjoining property owner. He lives in the house right there at the corner. And his question was the project limited to the current 25 acres as the entire farm was over 100 acres? The answer was yes. I don't know if Scott wants to elaborate on that any, but.
So really two answers to that. One, our approval is for the site we're showing you. So we don't have approval to go beyond that, but also the state program has a maximum of 2 megawatts. So we don't have the ability, we don't have the ability under the state program to go more than the size we're showing.
Is there a motion to approve? By Mr. Ritter, seconded by Mr. Mulcahy. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Case 1810.
Similar to Jasper that we discussed earlier, this is also a kind of a twin site project here. We're located at approximately 14225 East 9000 North Road, outside of Grant Park, Illinois. We call this St. solar, and the one after this is Saint 2. So Saint is the kind of east-west rectangle on the north side of the road.
Okay. This one was also heard on March 19th. Zoning board voted 5-0 to recommend approval. There were 4 people who spoke at public comment. Steve Merrick, an adjoining property owner, stated that he liked the concept. He lives in the house right on the corner to the right. Mr. E.J. Isaac, a resident of northern Minnesota, stated he lived 30 miles from the Canadian border and was just passing through the area and was interested in the project. He had many questions about climate change and the environment. All were adequately answered.
We get a commission on that if that, right?
Wait, hang on. We had a Mr. Wayne Hansen, an adjoining property owner. I believe he lives would be just past that red mark on the left side there on the south side of the road, and stated that he didn't think it was right and that he was opposed to the project. Also had Miss Karen Hansen, an adjoining property owner, asked the board if they would like one near their homes. That question was not answered.
Is there a motion to approve? By Mr. Ritter, seconded by Mr. Fairfield. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Saint 2, 1811. Can't add anything else.
I don't have much to say about this. Saint 2 is the southern rectangle.
Yes. Also heard on March 19th, also recommended for approval 5-0. There were 5 public comments. Ms. Carrie Dumas, again, addressed the board and asked about setbacks and glare. Both of those were adequately answered, and as far as the setback goes, it's actually farther setback than our ordinance requires. Our ordinance requires 100 feet, and I believe it was estimated to be over 400 feet setback from the road. Marvin Mankey, an adjoining property owner who farms the field across the street, asked about where the panels are manufactured and stated that they should be American-made. That was also answered. Kevin Prince, an adjoining property owner on a different site, asked about the steps of the approval process, which I believe were addressed earlier in this meeting. Mark Dumas, an adjoining property owner, stated that he did not feel the 400-foot setback was enough and is concerned that his view would be obstructed. He also feels that it would have a detrimental effect on his property and has concerns about electrical interference. Stephen Merrick, an adjoining property owner, asked about damage to the roads and who would pay for any damage, and that was answered that our ordinance requires that the developer have a road use agreement in place.
That's it. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Ritter, seconded by Mr. Wheeler. You're not seconding it. Oh, okay, okay. Question.
Are there any American-made panel manufacturers?
There are, and a number of our sites will likely feature American-made modules. We're just not at the final engineering stage yet where we can spec exactly which modules we will use.
Potentially tariffs, would that drive business towards that direction anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, likely will.
I believe it was testified that there are actually manufacturers in Illinois. Is that correct?
Dan was referring to a manufacturer in Rockford.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve? We already have that.
Sure.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Our thanks to all of you for your time, for your efforts, for all the work Delbert's done to get this to here. We truly appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you at the county board meeting.
Thank you.
We got 02. We're not done yet. We got still 2 more items.
Sorry, I apologize. We're done. We're just
you're
not.
done.
Can I have my clicker?
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, going to 1802.
ZBA case 1802 is a request for a special use permit in the agricultural district for a community solar garden in section 19 of Manteno Township, and I will allow the developer the same opportunity to present as we did the Cypress Creek. Oh, I can't get that here.
There you go.
There you go. I will caution you, just like the others, that you need to keep your presentation to what was said at the hearing. Okay.
Absolutely. I had zero appreciation for how much shorter that I was than those guys. I promise I'll make this very quick for y'all because CYPRESS did such a great job of covering solar overall. And I'll just kind of highlight the project and one or two things that I think maybe they didn't touch on. So this is a Mantino Community Solar Garden. It's out by the quarry, just to the west of Mantino.
Which quarry?
I just hit the wrong button.
It's Vulcan or Prairie?
That one.
Yeah.
I'll show.
Prairie?
Yeah, right there. You know, I think CYPRESS did a great job of just talking about solar overall, why it's coming to the state, so I really won't touch on that. Community Power Group has a fairly decent footprint in the state of Illinois. It's one of our primary focuses. We have other projects throughout the country. These are primarily the locations of the community solar gardens that are happening inside the state of Illinois. This particular project right here is right off of 45, very similar to the Cypress Creek projects. It's about 15 or so acres. Here's the actual plan of the site, right across the street. We avoid all wetlands. It's pretty clean, flat farming land. I don't believe it had a very good farming score in our soil and water report. But when we go through our site selections, we look at everything. We look at the solar radiance, we model the project out, we do physical sites, we look that it's appropriate given the existing surroundings, look at soil topography, electrical infrastructure to make sure a project can actually happen in that area. So when we're coming to you with something, there's been a significant amount of due diligence that's been done to know that the project's actually going to happen. All that has been done in tandem with Kankakee's permit requirements, and all that has been submitted and is in the packages on your desk. Solar gardens in general, one of the things that I don't know that CYPRESS touched on too much is how the community actually benefits from these types of things. So community solar gardens are specifically set up to get energy back to the community. There's state incentives that have that to make that happen. The way those state incentives work is that these solar panels have, the farm comes together. They have a meter on them, just like similar to the meter that you have on your house. The meter on your house spins one way, and it creates a bill. And you get a bill of $400 or $500 a month, whatever it may be. On a solar facility, the meter spins the other way, and we get a big bill, except it's a big negative. It is all sorts of net meter credits. And then what we do is we have subscribers to our solar facility, and those subscribers subscribe for a portion of those credits. So as a participant in a solar garden, the individuals of the community, they have their normal bill from ComEd, comes to $500, let's say. They buy $500 worth of credits from the community solar garden. and then they pay a fraction of the cost of those credits. So in a real world example, you'd have $500 bill, $500 worth of credits, and you would have paid Community Power Group $400 for those credits. Therefore, your electric bill would have been reduced by $100. That's how these community solar gardens work. And over the expected life of a community solar garden, it will save the local residents approximately $1.5 million. So there are real financial benefits to the local community of having solar facilities inside that community. And these two slides just basically give kind of a little rundown of how that happens. The solar panels generate energy. That energy goes, ComEd accounts for it, and then those credits are allocated to homes or buildings or whatever it may be. And so solar energy is a contractual relationship, very similar. And so the way I always describe solar energy is like you have a hose, a water hose, and that water hose goes into your house, and each light bulb drips a little bit of water. So that water hose, just like electric, goes into the house. Each light bulb is a little drip that comes off that electric line. Now, a mile up the road, there's a community solar garden. And that community solar garden is pumping, in essence, for the analogy, water into the electric wires, right? So, and then at your house, you're pulling off drip by drip. And so it isn't necessarily that exact green energy that you're getting in your house, but now your hoses are in essence being filled with the greener energy. And to the extent the sun isn't shining, that's being backfilled by all your traditional utilities that are out there. Soil benefits, I think the CYPRESS group touched on this well, so I'm not going to spend much time there. The electromagnetic field, again, the International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection says the recommended limits are 833 mgs. A solar facility at the boundary of the facility is 0.02 to 0.04. It's no different than being 1 foot away from a fluorescent light. So we've heard this as a repeated issue, but it just isn't. The rumored risks of noise, again, at the boundary, it's about 45 dBA, and that's just at the boundary, which is similar to a dishwasher. And so you clearly can't hear a dishwasher once you're more than, 50 feet away from it, never mind, a couple hundred feet. Our plan includes a landscape plan all along the northern and along the roadside to provide screening. Again, very similar to CYPRESS Creek. We'll have, just some evergreen vegetation along that. The fencing, there's some talk about, whether it should be more of a chain link fence or a, more of a country farm-oriented fence. We'll be working with the county and the special and the building permit process to determine what's appropriate there. These solar facilities can definitely attract wildlife, especially when they're screening around in that slight little buffer zone. So people that are worried about it chasing off wildlife, that just isn't the case. Birds, again, love these. They're perches, there's incremental food, everything else. The glare, the bottom line is solar. Solar is designed to absorb light, not reflect it. So it is less than a sitting pond, less than glass, less than steel. And drain tile, again, similar to CYPRESS, all these get flagged during construction. If any tiles are broken, we are required to fix them within our lease. And lastly, taxes, which again was largely covered by CYPRESS. Discounted power could be as much as $1.5 million worth of savings over the life of the facility. We'll likely start construction spring 2019. And there's always the chance, and this question has come up before, that if there's regional blackouts and enough solar being put into that local grid, that that the folks within the area of the community solar garden would still have their energy. Decommissioning is a part of our lease. Not to mention that it is also a part of the ordinance of Kankakee, and so we'll certainly be complying with that as discussed. And that is it.
What price per kilowatt does, do you get paid from ComEd, and that probably varies?
So whatever price is on your bill is the price that we get paid. So if your bill, you're getting 5 cents, you're paying 5 cents per kilowatt, that's what we get. And that would be the net meter credit that you get. And you would pay some fraction of that, whether it be a 10 or 20% discount. Yes, sir.
That was the case.
Reading. It's up to you guys to go out and find people to contract with on the community side. Is that what?
Yes, we are the ones that go out and find people to subscribe to these solar facilities.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Fairfield?
Has the village of Manteno and Bourbonnais been notified of this?
This is within the village of Manteno's extraterritorial boundary, and yes, they did send a communication that they had no issues with this solar farm.
Any others? Is there a motion to approve?
Let me just back up 1 second there.
Oh, that's
This
all right.
was heard at March 5th zoning board of appeals meeting. It was recommended for approval 7-0. There was one public comment, Mr. Alan Spangler, who was speaking for a property owner that owns a home to the northwest of this property. He had concerns about the loss of farmland, questioned why they were hiding the facility behind trees, and stated that he believes that it would attract large rodents to the site, and I believe his direct quote was, "rats the size of cats."
Attaboy, Alan. Could you go to the map of the site, please?
Oh, wrong way, sorry.
That one. Go.
No, back one more, right
That
there.
one right there. Mr. Spangler's house is that square up towards the top middle.
45 sign.
Well over a quarter mile away.
Oh, way there. Okay. Jim, you're familiar with this property. On the west side, where is that where the 45? That's where you're proposing. Never mind. I just know on the west side it's wet, but this is on a hill. Right. Right. That's on a hill. That's right.
It's not in a floodplain, and there's, was there a small wetland at the south end of the property or no?
Yeah, there was a small farmed wetland to the southwest of the site, but not in the site.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not part of this.
Yeah, right. That's on the hill. Okay. There's a motion to approve by Mr. Stauffenberg, seconded by Mr. Ritter. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, going on to number 6, historic preservation.
No problem.
Thank you for Michelle for that report.
I'm just handing this out. It's our annual report. We have been laxed in doing this. We were supposed to do this every year, and we just realized we hadn't been. So we've given you an annual report in history from 2007 to 17. We'll have it on the agenda next month for any questions or concerns.
Thank you.
That's all.
Any old business? Any new business? A motion to adjourn by Mr. Ritter, seconded by Mr. Fairfield. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you for your patience.